Yeah, the first couple songs were like hard times. That's like make me feel a little bit stupid. That's not yours. Yeah, let me get you some. Yeah. Damn, I'm not going here. Yeah, this is our Me? No, someone asked a question about my but there's a high probability.
Oh, yes.
So we don't rest.
That makes sense. Like it was so bad.
Oh, I got it.
Which I was like, it's like come on, guys, like super manly. I can see that as like hard that really helped me. And that's actually totally just a super.
It has to be like the
Sounds right.
I guess we'll give you a list. You know, have to go there
Listen, don't come over here starting. I'm not gonna start.
Do you guys do anything besides games? I hear you. I hear you.
I mean, in hindsight, I probably could have done a talk, but I didn't have data for it applied, so I was just like, I think this would be fun.
I'm nice.
Is it?
I don't know. What am I doing?
I don't remember what I was doing 7 months ago.
Topic?
Yeah, I'm like, I've moved on. And so then the feedback is like not as useful, right? That's the fruits of the world, right? Right. This is what I said I was going to do.
Hello, everyone. Hi. I hope you all got plenty of food. If at any point in time you feel like you are still hungry, please re-enter the dining room for some more food. I am going to be introducing our luncheon speaker. Her name is Leslie D. Martinez Etherly. She is the founder and CEO of CNTXTR Digital, which is a digital-first strategy and solutions firm rooted in community empowerment through workforce development. She's passionate about responsible community development and economic sustainability through tech-enabled entrepreneurship and digital and media literacy. Leslie holds a Bachelor's of Science in Applied Behavior Science, a Master's of Science in Marketing from Walden University, and is currently a PhD candidate in Community Psychology at National Louis University. So she understands the struggle. We asked Leslie to be here today to talk to us about Afrofuturism just because her background is readily at the intersection of what a lot of us think Afrofuturism is. And so I'm really interested and excited to hear what she has to say about her experience and where she thinks Afrofuturism is going in the future. So with a round of applause, let's welcome Leslie Etherly. I am so excited to be here. So I'm using this new cool app. So I'm actually recording and broadcasting. Isn't that cool? When I got the request to come in and speak for today, I think it was. I'm definitely a spiritual person. I'm all about divine intersections, right? Like that's a sign. Oh my goodness! Because I think we're at sort of this crossroads. We're at this moment where we get to show up. We get to show up as a full, self-defined person, and if I've been around just a little bit, and I've had to navigate a lot, right? I've had to choose whether I'm focusing on my womanhood or I'm focusing on being Black or Afro-Mexican, So I kind of have had to navigate. Do I drop Martinez? Do I keep Etherly? So it's kind of, there's a lot of navigating. So this conversation is really a breath of fresh air, a release, and an opportunity for me to be like really authentic, right? So this is pretty much the topic. I work really well in frameworks, and I'm modular. So thus the journey, purpose, design, and impact, and that's pretty much the four domains of this presentation. But what I really wanted to focus on was our narrative, our personal narrative, and who we are and our thoughts and our and our intellect. Like we're here for research and what we're excited about. But ultimately, when you look at the fabric of society, the fabric of the history that we are a part of, who we are is really what's going to make the difference, right? And so when I think of Afrofuturism, I think of the legacy component of that, and what does that mean? How am I being intentional when when I'm speaking to other people who are doing amazing things? Am I judging them? Am I kind of critiquing myself? Am I showing up fully? So anyway, so just to give you a little sense of where I'm going, I'm going to get really personal. So I hope that's okay. I am a Chicagoan, born and raised, right? So actually I grew up on the north side of Chicago, so not too far from here. Andersonville. Well, it wasn't Andersonville when I was, but I spent a little time in Rogers Park, I think 6 or 7, and then we moved a little further south. But I realized that in order for me to give this presentation authentically, I had to kind of take some notes of some moments, and so what I hope to do is kind of give you a modeling. So think about yourself. You see me up here. Think about your journey, and think about the timeline, right? So as far back as you can remember, or not remember, and then begin to mentally take notes of every pivotal experience that has shaped a decision, every person, every relationship, and you'll start to realize there's themes, right? So I definitely believe that, for each one of us and the research that we're choosing to embark upon is not an accident. We are pulling together all the things that make sense for us and owning it and moving forward and charging forward with that. So without further ado, here's my timeline. How do you put almost 40 years in one slide? I don't know. And so as I'm talking to you, I'm probably going to skip around. I really kind of use this for myself to make sure that I didn't forget anything. I wanted to make sure that I paid homage to 1979 when something amazing happened. Two people got together. And in 1980, I came into this world. And so I kind of wanted to just acknowledge that moment because it was necessary for me to even be here today, right? So all of us have that moment that you had nothing to do with. And this is when we're talking about legacy, and we're talking about ancestry, and we're talking about origin stories. We need to understand that a lot of things had to come together and line up for you to, exist. All right. So here's where my story kind of, gets a little interesting. I had a mom who was a psychology minor, so education major, and she used a lot of that psychology on me growing up. And so her lineage is, she came up through, she was a baby born in New Orleans, came up during the second wave of the Great Migration, and made her way with her family to Chicago. But she was always kind of questioning systems. I think I get a lot from her in one sense. But she made this choice early on that I wasn't going to kind of participate in the traditional schooling. And so I was homeschooled. Now, I was homeschooled and I was an only child. So needless to say, it was very intense. And so there was some things that I very early on that I learned to navigate and to kind of process on how we do things. So I'm kind of taking note of early on, I realized how I functioned is still in play today based on this experience. Now, my mother, interestingly enough, even with her forward thinking, really kind of she considers it an escape from her blackness. So when she came to the North Side, there was she was part of the she lived at Cabrini Greens, and there was kind of this disdain for black people. And I'm just she's not here, so I'm good. But I kind of realized early that there was no talk about me being black. The only reference was me knowing that my other parent was Mexican. But that was pretty much the only conversation about cultural identity that I had. It was functionality. It was you have a lot of skill so that you can make some money, so that you can have a better life. And that was pretty much the narrative I was raised under. And so homeschool, entrepreneurship was ingrained. I was slinging popsicles at 5, seriously. I had a very rigorous schedule. My days would start about 4 a.m., and it included guitar, piano, voice. I'd go out and and this is between the ages of 6 to probably about 11. I was a classically trained vocalist. I would do gymnastics. I was a competitive gymnast and all those types of things, right? Because I was going to be somebody. And my mother was really intent about how I was going to be reared. But then something happened, right? We economics kind of happened, and my mom had to get a job. And so that's what introduced me to traditional schooling. So in 1992, I entered the 6th grade. And that was
really traumatic for me. And it was a private Christian school. It was we wore uniforms, and it was just completely opposite from everything that I had learned. And so two things that the reason I put this on my timeline is that in that moment, I realized I was really good at writing. I won these amazing awards, trips to Disney World because of my writing, and I realized that kids didn't like me. So there was this understanding that just because you're good at something and your talents doesn't mean that you have connections with other people, right? I just put that down because I really realized that that's when I began to shift and navigate. And at 12 years old, really realized that people only really want to interact with a certain part of you, right? And then I ended up leaving that school, went to another private Christian school, and I found this a fascination. I was introduced to Mein Kampf, right? And so I voraciously read Mein Kampf, and it was so interesting because all of the evil and all the negative, obviously, Hitler was horrible. But there was something about what he was doing and the method in which he did it that really sort of got at me. And there was something I couldn't really articulate until much later. And then it all kind of made sense. So that was a pivotal moment. I understood that a person with an idea infected the masses, right? I started understanding that original thought was probably the most powerful thing that humans have ever sort of encountered, right? So an idea, and I began to understand that an idea is very much like a virus. And so a lot of my self-directed research as a kid came along these two modes. One is that the power of an idea is contagious, positive or negative. If you hear it and you adopt it and it takes root, it begins to fester, right? Either positive or negative in terms of the outcome. So ideas are really positive, are really powerful. And so that really kind of started shaping my interest and kind of how I began to operate. All right, so 1995. Was anyone here around in 1995 in Chicago? All right, so there's this there was this heat wave. I think it actually went throughout the whole country, and it killed a lot of people here in Chicago. And I was about 10 minutes away from dying. My mother experienced a lapse in her mental capacity. Pretty much she closed all the windows in the middle of a 100-degree morning, and her the thoughts in her mind had basically us under attack. Poured bleach all over our food and our space, our living space, and if it had not been for a couple chance conversations with people knocking on the door, we probably would have been dead. Right. So I say that's a pivotal moment when you realize that between today and that day, 10 minutes, changes the course of life, right? So then I started becoming more present and more aware just of who I am. At this point, I really still didn't have a sense of cultural identity. I knew that there were people who identified as Black, and I know this sounds like really, really weird, but really, if you're raised not to have a conversation about being African American, not really knowing that my mother didn't even talk about slave ships. she didn't even talk about lineage, right? It was an absence of conversation until I transferred myself to a public school. And so in 1997, that's when I started attending Senn High School. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Senn High School. It's SENN, but sin is implied, right? It was kind of like Dangerous Minds. It was very intense. And so coming from coming from a very sheltered, homogeneous, environment that was very sort of one track. This is something that just really opened up the world for me, and it was the first time that I actually hung out with Black folks. And it changed sort of my understanding of who I was. And I think and the reason I'm kind of focusing on that right now is because of just how special the space is, the opportunity to be intentional and to prioritize our narratives, to prioritize our research through a certain lens. Oh my goodness. This is really, really special. And so I just started realizing that, I'm hopping through like a whole bunch of things here, but I started, because I transferred into that school, I realized I love storytelling. I love narratives. Narratives are truly important for synthesizing all the research. It's context. Like the reason why we love Black Panther is because of the narrative, because of our ability to connect with a lived experience or the vision or the modeling of a lived experience that we can attain, that we can aspire to, right? All right, so moving kind of through my interest, I've had a lot of different stopping points where I focused on media production. I went through Columbia College. I thought I was going to be like the director of the century, and then I realized that that's not how this works, and so I ended up dropping out of college. So it took me 14 years to kind of wind my way through the undergraduate experience. And I know that seems like really weird because being homeschooled, there's an expectation that somehow I'm going to thrive in that sort of environment. But I would say because of the disconnect of identity, that took a much longer time, right? So there's this lived experience about that I'm sort of navigating. I'm still understanding who I am. I'm understanding poverty. I'm understanding some serious barriers to everything that I was, that all the expectations of who I was going to be and what I was going to do came through this lens that I'm broke. I'm broke, and no one's investing in me. So long story, I'm trying to speed this up a little bit, but I kind of hit rock bottom about 2006. So after September 11th happened, I worked for the airlines. And that really sort of shook my boat, and I decided to focus on community. So I started volunteering, started getting into the hip-hop arts. I was a breakdancer, I was an MC. Hip-hop saved my life, I'll say that again, right? So number 2 is hip-hop saved my life. And I started using the film and photography that I had learned in those moments at college to actually tell the story of this amazing movement that was happening on the north side. So there's a hip-hop organization called Connect Force. I was a co-founder of that, and Kuumba Links was also our partner. I don't know if you know Kuumba Links at all. Anyway, so these are really sort of grassroots movements. So my legacy, so I started connecting with community and started establishing my place in creating my own legacy, right? The fact that I saw a need, and so what we used to do is we would sort of hold court in a open dance space, and we would have all the 4 elements of hip hop kind of going on at once. They'd be out in the back learning some graffiti art. They'd be on the floor breakdancing. We'd be over here doing some cybers, and it was just this amazing space, and that lasted for about 10 years. But what I started realizing is that there were some gaps. There was gaps in opportunity when it came to telling our own stories. So from a nonprofit standpoint, and this is what I'm getting into the good stuff here. From the nonprofit standpoint, those who could tell their stories got funding. Those who could present, and those who had, at around 2009, obviously digital shifted. those who could take advantage of this technology were seeing increase, and those who didn't were not. And so I started like, wow, it just started prompting in me the understanding of gaps and disparities and things of that nature. And I realized that there was something to this, and that I was going to find my purpose in that, right? So as like the digital media revolution happens, now we have access to cheap ways of telling our story. Now we're online. Now everyone has a website. And more, the gaps between the haves and the have-nots sort of come through this cavern of the internet. And so I just started realizing and taking note, like, man, okay, I think this is, someone needs to do something about this. Who's actually caring about this sort of digital divide? I got involved with Chicago. At some point, I get a bachelor's. Yeah, I go through this accelerated program. I get my bachelor's in applied behavioral science. I start getting more analytical in my presentation. I'm able to articulate some things, and so now I'm able to make a case. And that's kind of where I came up with my organization. We've gone through some changes, but Contextual Media Network was the name of my organization that I founded in 2015, and it was really just focused on supporting community organizations through technology to tell their story, to position them to take advantage of the opportunities through narrative work. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. And so I had some assumptions about how this work was going to be done. I thought, this is going to be great. I'm like, go to Inglewood, and I'm like, do some workshops, and they're like, going to get it, and then they're like, and then everything's going to be like great, and that was kind of like what I went to this work, and I thought that, okay, this is exactly how I'm going to shift the narrative, bring all the resources to the community, and that didn't happen. I feel like, from my perspective, I failed miserably. Other people will say, not so much. But it's something about this iterative journey that I'm just trying to convey, is that it's okay. In order for me to get to where I am now, I had to sort of take note of all the things and all the reoccurring themes in order for me to get sharper and to get better. All right. And so these are, some of the summaries about this journey, is that memories are only the fertilizer for the future harvest, right? And what that means is, we only really control this moment. Everything else that has happened is simply a figment, right? So we process memories, we say they have value, and we take them with us, and they influence our decisions in the now. And we have no control over the future. And so in this moment is pretty much all we have control over. And so in processing how I move forward, this was really, really important. And so I just encourage you, as you are positioning yourselves through your research, as you're kind of understanding what the next steps in terms of collective action, this is really, really important. So it just makes you a little bit sharper in making the choices that matter. All right, so these are, after I kind of assessed my life in the matter of 10 minutes, I realized that there were some filters. There were some reoccurring things. So that's kind of that next thing, is to kind of take an assessment of all the areas, whether they were personal or areas of interest, where you realize there's a trend. I keep coming back to publishing. I keep coming back to writing. I keep coming back to my interest in this or that, or how people relate to this topic, and the sharper that you get in understanding what those trends are, the clearer your purpose is, right? And so Afrofuturism, from my perspective, is really about us getting better, like us being intentional about who we are and where we're going. And then we begin to make roads that allow for the next generations to make way. So it's really my charge to you is understand yourself, understand all these trends and these themes that have come up in your life, and you will ultimately design the future that you want. And so these are kind of just some high level things. So I'm a 4-time published children's author. I thought that was going to hit. Like I really thought that was going to be it. But it didn't. So I got into digital publishing, and what I realized is that I love unpacking process. Like, so the idea is like a lot of people say, well, I want to write a book and I want to distribute it. And I want to, I kind of want to build an audience. But how do I do that? And because I did it for myself, I realized that I got really good at explaining the process. So breaking down the myth of how to go from point A to point B in our ideas, right? So it's hyper-process oriented and owning the means of production. So all these are themes that are in my work currently. And so the moral of the story is that, what we've experienced in our life is actually the perfect recipe for the harvest that's to come, right? So there are no regrets. There are no, just realizing that the near-death experiences and all the negatives and that sort of thing is actually exactly what you need to forge into the future. And so I just think it's really important that you receive that and understand that in order to design what comes next. So, all right, so my themes in terms of contexture, so CNTXTR is contexture without the vowels. And so contexture is the act of weaving things together. And it's a very intentional name because I believe that each person is a thread in that weave. And so my goal and my purpose is in supporting you as an individual and your ideas through infrastructure. So developing tools, digital tools and resources that you can harness in any way that you see fit to support your next, whatever your next is, right? So the idea is that, community is almost gold. Community is gold, right? So if you don't have a sense of community, it's going to be really hard for you to overcome anything. And so this is really at the core of Contexture and the work that I do. The idea is that we are moving into a digital-first experience. If you have an entrepreneurial idea, in order to get people's support, the first thing they ask you is, "Oh, where's your website?" Right? So if there's a learning barrier, if you don't know how to make your own website, then you have to ask somebody. If someone who's a professional says, well, it costs, let's say $1,000, right? This is my living. So now you have two things that are in your way of getting what you need to move forward with your idea. So the idea is I began to realize that there is this thing called design inequity. Design inequity is the idea that those who are marginalized, those who come from communities that are under-resourced and under-positioned, right, don't have a choice aesthetically. So, or that the idea is that when they go to an office, a social service office, they don't get to choose how they interact in that space or what the space looks like. But oftentimes, those with more money or more resources have more control over the aesthetic of spaces. And there's many different iterations of what design inequity actually looks like. It's design injustice, the idea of oppression through spaces, depression through design, intentional design, right? And so I realized that design equity was really what I'm about. So the idea is that everyone deserves good design. And what does that mean? So for, let's say, you have a business idea and you're really passionate about it, you're really good at what you do. Let's say it's makeup or something to that effect, right? But you know that your business has to be translated to an online interface. But that's not your area of expertise. So there's, oftentimes what happens is that translation of the quality of work and the digital interface gets undermined because of lack of a know-how or lack of resources and things of that nature. So a lot of my solutions and my tools are looking at closing that gap between your idea and your ability to communicate it to the point where you get now resources because of that presentation. Does that make sense? Okay. The other part of my research, which is what I'm really excited about, is about the dynamics of access to capital. So understanding capital, so the research breaks down what capital is to four main domains. The first domain, obviously, is financial. Your ability to access investment dollars, investment dollars through banks, investment dollars through friends and family, however you get money to pay for that web designer to do your website, that is called capital. There's three other domains. The other domain is social capital. Who do you know? Who do you know gets you in the door? I know a guy, they got me on a list, I'm good, right? So that experience is very connected to the success of an entrepreneurial endeavor. The more people you know, the more resources you have in the space allow for more opportunity. So the fact that you're connected to a Northwestern experience automatically increases your social capital because of the people who are associated with this organization and who are in this room. So that's really important. So the third one has to do with cultural capital. Now, initially you might think cultural capital has to do with your identity. But actually, in fact, it's your ability to thrive in other cultural experiences that are leading the conversation. For instance, if your life experience has to do with, is pretty much on the South Side or in a community that's majority Black, your ability to thrive, let's say, in all-white business institution or space will make or break your success. So we understand the value of that, right? So code switching comes under cultural capital. Your ability to leverage the language, leverage the nuances of business, the norms, that we let that slide over here. All of that has to do with cultural capital. And so the fourth one has to do with human capital. And human capital is actually your ability to either be invested in for your education or your ability to self-educate, right? So my ability to be self-taught. So because I had because I was very self-directed from a homeschool experience, I went to the library and stayed for hours. I knew how to process information and kind of lead my interest, right? So a lot of our young people who are in environments where they're pretty much dictated to, they don't get that experience. So access to human capital and knowledge and that digital literacy falls under that as well, is kind of an obstacle, right? And so my research is really focused on understanding how does an entrepreneur in the 21st century navigate, and specifically Black and Latinx entrepreneurs navigate these spaces, and how do they self-regulate how they access capital, okay? And then there's also this new emerging thing that says that these four domains of capital are evolving because through a digital experience. The idea that you could have have everything you need in those four domains in an in-person experience, but then when you get online, if you're not connected to the right people on LinkedIn, you might not get the job, right? Or if you're not leveraging your ability to learn the online, use YouTube University or whatever you need to get, to learn in that pinch, right? That's going to make or break your success or your quality of life. So that's really important. So that's kind of where I tie in my research and then actually use designing. 5 minutes. Oh, okay. No. Do you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Man, it's great. Yeah, I've been yapping. No, go ahead, talk. Yeah, I'm waiting for someone to cut me off.
So, it's very interesting that you're talking about capital, right? Because, I mean, we also think about popularity to a certain extent and influence is very essential to, like, any type of career that you have. And so, it's interesting that you're bringing up, like, minorities. And, I mean, I think most of us were very culturally aware, right? But we don't have, like, the human capital, of course, the money capital. And so, like, based off of your research, do you know if minorities need more advancement in certain types of capital, and if so, how do we do that?
So interestingly enough, there's not a lot of research on it, and so that's why I'm leading that. So these are the gaps in the research, and the thing is that there's a lot of quantitative research about what makes an entrepreneur successful. So there's a lot of numbers that say access to capital increases your opportunity, but there's not a lot of narrative. There's not a lot of qualitative knowledge about the nuances, and that's actually kind of how I'm formulating my research, is actually overlaying the narrative. Our storytelling is extremely important to understanding how we move and what is necessary to get to the next level. So that's actually something that I'm interested in, but in terms from a Black and Latinx perspective, there's not a lot of research. There are research that has to do with the impact of social capital specifically. Like there's one domain, like social capital is actually there's always trending topics, but social capital is something that we, especially in Chicago, recognize as very vital to sort of the breakthrough of economic development here in the city. I know we're in Evanston, but I'm still in Chicago. Sorry. So this is something that I'm looking to actually inform. There's a lot of research in terms of minority groupings in who's like, so Black women are the fastest, so the largest growing minority group in starting a new business, right? So we do know that, but in terms of that experience, we need to be more intentional in terms of understanding the barriers of, it's also understood that the less Black women are underfunded when it comes to venture capital. And then actually we operate our average income for our entrepreneurial endeavors is something like $27,000.
So, just considering all of those factors, right, and saying that we need more qualitative information, it's also going to be very subjective in how we get that qualitative information, and the differences between people who self-identify as a majority included, but then also how they represent, how they use their capital, and what are the differences they have in access to capital. And I say that because I've worked at a tech startup, so part of the narrative for the tech startup is like, oh, we started this business with like $1,000 loan from the owners, from the CEO's parents, blah, blah, blah. But it takes other people looking at that and saying, yes, maybe you did start with $1,000 loan from your parents, but because, you went to WashU and you had this network of friends, you had somebody that could build a platform for you, necessarily where you didn't start off paying them their salary they deserve, but you had access to that person. Your parents had access to other people that could then give you loans after your friend built this platform, right? So, whereas if you're talking to the CEO of the company, he's like, well, I started this, from the ground up with $1,000. But it's like, no, really, your network and your capital built this. Right. And so, if you're talking to other people that are trying to do that, how is that narrative coming out, and is that something that realistically they can follow? Not if they don't have that network.
Exactly. I mean, that's you're hitting it right on the head, and so that's something that what I'm looking to actually do is overlay the qualitative assessment of the storytelling. So I do this through focus groups. So we're doing focus groups, small roundtables, basically allowing for a free-form conversation, and then we're taking that, recording that, and then kind of getting these domains based on that. So I'm in the middle of that actually thesis, analyzing that thesis research. So once we have that, once we actually extract those different domains, we can actually overlay that with some well-known measurement tools that are kind of standard when it comes to capital, understanding capital. And then we can kind of see if there's some gaps and some opportunities in what those localized conversations were with sort of the larger data set. So that we actually can see if there's some variance or something that hasn't been sort of identified, right? And so from a design standpoint, as we're hearing that, what are the kind of tools? What are the things we need to develop to overcome some of these hurdles? How do I increase my network's capital? And so. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to, so the understanding of capital, the human-centered design is actually an approach of how we develop these tools. And ultimately, we're aiming for sort of systems change, in this area. So that's kind of, I'm just going to move forward a little bit. How are we on time? Is anyone? Okay. Okay, great. So just for the sake of... Okay, great. Thank you. I'm like, I have no sense of time right now. So just sort of understanding that all of those nuances are informing the business, sort of what Contexture does in terms of developing digital products and services, developing platforms to be intentional, to increase social capital, to increase sort of your presentation and your access to mobile responsive websites and sort of a digital strategy that's going to propel you versus keep you behind. All right, so just understanding how I'm looking at business models in regards to social impact. So there's kind of these three main models. So the first one is the direct service model. The idea that you're developing a business that is focused on the target audience who has needs, right? And so you're developing the product or service intended for consumption by that audience, right? The second one is more the mediator model. That idea is that the business is put in a position where we get to work directly with this market, this opportunity in the market space, this gap. But then being intentional with our target support, our needs audience, and almost mitigate the financial opportunity that happens between them, right? And then there's this other one where you're a benefactor corporation where you pretty much are making a lot of money, and then you are intentional about revenue sharing with a specific group. So some examples of that. So like the benefactor model could kind of seem like a Tom's, right? Tom's shoes where, they're selling shoes, they're in business to sell shoes, and then they say, because we've made a lot of money, we're going to be intentional on giving some shoes away or sharing some of that money with a certain audience. So that's a type of social impact model. And then the direct service model says maybe solves for, let's say, a food desert in a neighborhood and says, how do we get affordable food to a community that doesn't have any at an affordable price? So you begin to develop the product or service that's focused on the needs, the need community, and begins to innovate in that space. But then Contexture, we kind of do a little bit of all three. So the idea is that we're developing products that look at these three different models and actually implement kind of that business structure. So from Contexture's digital standpoint, and so I've had to go through a lot of redesigning. So Contexture Media Network, pretty much we started off as a nonprofit, and that model just was not sustainable. The idea is that the need was so great that our capacity was not making revenue off of that audience. So that direct service model in the media and website building service was not meeting the needs of low-income entrepreneurs. And so we began to rethink what that looks like. So we're kind of looking at that mediator model, where we're actually focused on first is developing sort of the Gen Zs, the Gen X, Ys, and Zs, and sort of positioning them as experts, right? So we already know that in terms of content consumption on mobile devices, we're leading culture, we're creating viral content, and we're not getting paid for it. So the idea is that Contextual Digital is focused on developing this training producers camp, in a sense, where we are known in the industry for producing effective, dynamic, multimedia content. We're we're in 3 different domains: music, movies, and fashion. But we're kind of like really sort of owning the fact that we're great at target audience, content development, and creative digital natives. And then brokering, in a sense, the larger firms that have this money, that need our expertise, and making sure that the payment is equitable and that we're getting what we deserve. So that's basically how we are implementing at our core brand this mediator impact model. All right, and so the next has to do with the direct service, right? So we had to rethink. So for all the nonprofits and the organizations that needed the well-designed websites and the recap videos, the org stories, all that production, they needed that. But we weren't able to do it sort of in a pro bono way. So what we're actually looking at launching is this Let's Launch campaign. So it's the idea of positioning our products and services at the core of an ideation curriculum, right? So ideation all the way through launch, and how to be lean in your startup and measure your impact through digital tools and resources. All right, and so this is our big audacious goal for the next year and a half. We're actually looking to position our website building platform, which is live, contexture.co, to support the launch of 25,000 entrepreneurs globally by 2021. And so what that looks like is we're looking to have our website building platform as your lean launch support system that is extremely affordable. So the idea is that you need to rapidly prototype a membership portal, or you need to rapidly prototype sort of, the framework for an app, or present your business that's media. So you need to embed your audio files. You want to kind of, launch your blog, or whatever you need to do to position yourself. You can use our platform you can use our platform to do that. And so what we're looking at, and this is where the collective resourcing model comes in, is that for every 25,000 entrepreneurs that we get on our platform, we're actually lowering the price. So up to $1 million, we can actually sustain the platform and use it as sort of an open source, in a sense, a support system for rapid ideation and investment for the future. Any questions? Okay. No, we're there. But these are our brands. This is where we're going, and this is how to find me. All right. Yeah. So we're all done. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.